This modeling techniques helps you better understand the learning objectives that you're working with in a given course. You'll notice in this particular screen I'm using Microsoft Excel, and what I'm going to do is actually plot out the learning objectives that I'm using in a course using a visualization technique. So what I have here is, first of all, I have to code my learning objectives using a given taxonomy. Here I'm using Bloom's revised taxonomy. So you'll notice I have levels of learning beginning with remembering all the way through creating. I've also taken each of these and assigned them a code. So for remembering, I've assigned it 1. All the way through creating, I've assigned it 6. Now, so once I have this code established, then I go to the objectives that I'm working with in my course, and I begin assigning these levels based on those outcomes. So for example, I have one dealing with developing design patterns, which was creating things, which is a 6. So I'm going to complete doing this. Notice I have a 6 here for creating. I'm going to develop a new strategy, which is 6, and then analyzing, which is a 4. According to our code that we have established up here based on that taxonomy. Now what's interesting here is once I have codes established for each of my learning objectives, then I have some flexibility and interesting options of how to visualize that. Now why I would want to do this is by visualizing the learning objectives, I can gain a better understanding of the patterns and trends and various aspects of how the learning objectives work within the course that I'm designing. So for example here, I'm going to go and use a technique called a spark line. This is in the Insert tab, and here under Spark Lines I'm going to select the Line tab. And for the data range, I'm selecting the coded values for the learning objectives that I have. So I'm going to select OK. And you notice I have a visualization that has been created that plots out the progression and sequence based on those codes. So from here I can kind of get a very high level view of how the learning objectives progress throughout the given course. Now in this case I have a lot of higher level learning objectives. If I was going to teach a course that I'm looking for more progression, so things beginning with remembering and ending with something like applying or analyzing, this is quite useful because I can see how those objectives are progressing over time. Another technique that you might think about using for within Excel is using a heat map. Now you'll notice that the levels of learning here again are coded, only this time I'm going to select them and then use the conditional formatting options in Excel. Now you have several opportunities to choose from various options here, but what I'm going to do is use the color-coded option. Now you'll notice by just selecting that, each of my learning objectives are now coded. Now what's important to note about this is that it's going to code based on the high and the low points. So in this case I only have 2 values, and so I can see where those 2 values are and the differences between them. Now let's say hypothetically that I had one of these that was a lower level learning objective, so I'm just going to change this to 1. You'll notice that those values actually change in this model that I'm working with. Now this can be very useful when trying to understand the magnitude of the learning objectives that you're dealing with in a course. So for example, if you're dealing with a lot of higher level learning objectives, you're going to approach the instruction of that course much differently than what you might if you're dealing with a lot of learning objectives that are dealing with lower level things like remembering or understanding. So just a few things to keep in mind. The visualization of learning outcomes doesn't necessarily tell you which way you should design a course. It merely is designed to help highlight some important insights about the decisions that you're going to have to make when you go about designing or teaching a course. So here we talked a little bit about an approach to modeling learning outcomes that can be quite useful when you're going about designing and teaching courses.